And now, here's Johnny.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Here is a bulletin. Here is a bulletin.
What is it? Stand by, please. Stand by, please.
In Dallas, Texas.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. In the motorcade route.
It's been leader.
3 shots were fired.
3. Put me on, Phil. Put me on. 3. Put me on, Phil. Put me on. 3.
President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
Stand by, please. Stand by, please.
More details just arrived. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up. She called, "Oh no. Oh no.
The energy.
Oh no.
The faith.
Oh no.
The devotion.
Oh no." The motorcade sped on.
The world is very different now.
Something has happened here. We understand there has been a shooting. Something has happened here. I can see many, many motorcycles. I can see many, many motorcycles. Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. Something has happened here. Many, many motorcycles. Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. Something has happened here. Something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong.
More details just arrived. Mrs. Kennedy jumped up. She called, "Oh no. Oh no.
The energy.
Oh no.
The faith.
Oh no.
The devotion.
Oh no." The motorcade sped on.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 85 of Pirate Radio Podcasts. The host, as always, the ship's chief communications officer, Jaffe Ryder. This week we tackle one of the world's hottest news stories there is at the moment, JFK Files. Joining us for the first hour is the man who's known to many as the godfather of reality television, actor, comedian, television host, documentary filmmaker, and the only performer in TV history to ever win Emmys for both entertainment and news shows, John Barbour. Mr. Barbour is also, just so happens to be, the creator and producer of the Garrison tapes, the American media, and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Welcome, John, to Pirate Radio Podcasts. Now, I was going to first ask you actually how the recent conference in Dallas was, but I guess you actually you made a recent trip out to Washington, D.C. Is that not the case?
Yes, my film played. Judith Baker asked if I would let them play the film, and last year, Jeffy, I took the rough cut there, November 22nd, and played it at the Texas Theater. There were about 300 people there. It got a spontaneous standing ovation, and the very interesting thing about it was that about 280 of the people, or about 80% of them, had never been born when John Kennedy had been killed. But I notice as I travel around the country, there is something telepathic going on. I'm totally non-religious, but there's something, first of all, blessed about this second film I just made, which is called, as you said, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But instead, I went to Washington, D.C., because I feel that this is going to be the last hurrah for John Kennedy's justice and for the memory of Jim Garrison, who was the only law enforcement officer, not only to investigate the case, but in 1967, he solved the case. But I went back there because of the so-called CIA files dump. And I must say that is the most appropriate word, the files dump, because that's what the American government and the media and the CIA have been doing to us since they murdered John Kennedy in 1963 is just absolutely dump on us. So I thought that what I would do, I would invite members of Congress to see what has been described, not by me, but by leading experts, leading research experts in the field, as the absolute definitive film on the murder of John Kennedy and the growth of fake news as exposed by Jim Garrison for the purpose of creating fake wars, from the Cold War with Russia, which was a fake war because, as Garrison says in the film, they lost 25 million people, John. They were no threat to us. What was a threat to us was peace. So the Central Intelligence Agency was created to change American foreign policy. And what they did is they created a project called Project Mockingbird, which was designed to infiltrate and take over the mainstream media to change the hearts and minds of Americans to go along with the warfare state that Dwight Eisenhower had warned us about. And we all know that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was also a fake false flag that led to the Vietnam War, and then also Iraq. Now, I must tell you, Jeffy, I tell hundreds and hundreds of people not to watch my movie. And I'll tell you why. I guess I'm reminded of Jack Nicholson's line in A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." Americans, have been turned into inactive political zombies because they realize with the war in Iraq, they have no influence whatsoever over their warmongering government. As a matter of fact, a year before Martin Luther King was murdered, he spoke at the Riverside Church in New York, and you can Google it, and he said, "I hate to say this, but the largest terrorist organization in the world is my government and my Pentagon." And of course, a year later, he was set up to be murdered by, amongst others, by the assistance of the FBI. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But I thought what I would do, I would invite a number of congressmen. John Kennedy in June of 1963 gave the greatest peace speech ever at American University. As a matter of fact, John Kennedy is the only peace president we have had in 100 years. And I thought if I could show it at American University, it would be the perfect platform to show this film. And a professor by the name of Chris Simpson said he'd be more than honored to show it to his students. It was too late to book it for the main theaters that they had at the university because it was so late. But he set up an unbelievable screening in a large classroom that had standing room only. Interesting sidebar to that. There was a young lady, 19 years of age, who was almost in tears at the end of the film. And of course, we had a question and answer. And she said, "I'm so glad that I have seen this because long before I knew you were coming here, I had been researching Jim Garrison." And I asked her why. And she said, "Well, I'm a very, very distant cousin of the Kennedys." Now, fortunately, I had an extra DVD, so I autographed it to her. But thrilling things like that happened to me all along. Then I was invited to speak to the press club, to the McClendon group at the press club, and that again was standing room only. And then there was another place called Mott House where we had another full house, and there I was interviewed for an hour by TASS. Now, TASS, TASS, is Russia's leading news agency. Now, we had 3 positive replies from all the Congress people that we notified who said that they would be there, but they never did show up. But the reason as I started to say that, I warned folks not to look at it. We all know that weapons of mass destruction did not exist long before Bush and his war criminals initiated shock and awe. Millions of folks around the country, from Los Angeles, San Francisco to D.C., Chicago, and Detroit, marched against the impending war because they knew there were no weapons of mass destruction and it did no good. And you also notice that the war ended in Vietnam when Walter Cronkite, Uncle Walter, said, you know, this war looks like it's unwinnable. Once Uncle Walter said that to America, that war was over. But, you know, the folks who own us and the folks who did away with the draft so that no middle-class white folks would be no longer killed, and the reason they got signed NAFTA and got all jobs out of the country is so these young people graduating from college wouldn't have any place to go but to join the military. So they're very bright, but you notice when they started shock and awe, all the reporters had to be embedded. There were no more independent reporters. So I say to a number of people, if you can't handle the truth, do not watch this film, because you will know absolutely who murdered John Kennedy. You will absolutely know who was responsible for lying to us about the murder of John Kennedy from the media. And you'll also learn how, you know, when John Kennedy was killed, a company in this country could only own 5 television or radio stations. But they needed the control of all of them. And what Bill Clinton did in 1996 is signed a Communications Act. And now 95%, Jaffe, of all media in America is owned by only 6 corporations who are just propagandists for the empire. So that's why I went back to Washington, D.C., and I was absolutely thrilled that I did. But you would think if I were a reporter in Washington and this guy's coming along with what he says is the definitive film that not only solves the case, it shows you how you can bring justice and change America in an instant. Jaffe, as you know, there are hundreds of books and hundreds of films and documentaries and articles about the murder of John Kennedy. All of these only show 3 things. First of all, that the Warren Commission was a fraud. Second, that John Kennedy was shot from the front. And third, that Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with it. But this is all information that could only be brought out in a trial. For now, it's useless trivia. The only one to go to trial, as you know, was Jim Garrison. And he presented 67 boxes of his material to the House Select Committee. The House Select Committee concluded, in other words, they overruled the Warren report and said there were more than 4 shots, a conspiracy existed. They turned the files over to the Justice Department, where it is a cold case but uninvestigated. 2 things solve it. Mine, the American media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, shows you how simple it is. First, in 1981, when I interviewed him, he gave me a list of people. He said, John, here's a list of people alive who should be questioned about this. Now, as you know, time has passed. A lot of them are dead, but some of them are still alive. So at the end of the film, I put together 10 most wanted posters. Of those 10 still alive, and the leading folks on the poster, I delivered the poster to the Justice Department. That's how simple it is. These people should be questioned. And of course, the first is Dan Rather, who lied to us about the direction of the head when the bullet struck him. He said it went forward when we all know it went backwards. But we didn't see that until 1975 when Dick Gregory and Robert Groden showed the Zapruder film. And then the folks were so outraged by the fact we were lied to, they wanted a new investigation. So they set up the House Select Committee. And they chose the toughest guy in America to head it up, Richard Sprague. Richard Sprague only had 6 aides when he started. And he told them, we're not hiring any CIA agents or FBI agents to investigate them. We are going to investigate them. Well, immediately, the assets the CIA owns. Now, in 1970, Senator Frank Church found out in hearings that you see in the film, there were 40 paid CIA assets working in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Reader's Digest, NBC, CBS, writing our news to create fake wars.
Well, let's just stop you right there, John. Can you repeat that one more time, just so everyone can hear that and loudly and clearly for the record? How many operatives have been embedded at that point?
At that point in the 1970s, it was 400, and you see Helms on camera admitting to the fact that they had 400 writing the news for Americans to consume.
That'd be Richard Helms, I believe, who held what position?
At the head of the Central Intelligence Agency.
He was head at that time, was he? I see. Okay.
Yeah. But in any event, that is all in the film now. We have now fake wars against fake enemies called terrorists. I must tell you, there is no country in the world who is more of a threat to America than our own government. We are going to implode. Let me ask you a question. When did you learn that we had troops in Niger?
Well, probably just right now, I suppose.
And why did you happen to learn it?
Because you've just presented that to myself and the rest of our listening audience. Well,
the reason it happened is because 4 or 5 of our troops over there got murdered.
I see.
It was headline news 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Now, where was the American media before that saying, "Hey, why are we sending troops into Niger?" And only because some of them were ambushed and murdered did we find out about it. So,
this is breaking. This is really, breaking. Maybe I don't follow, myself to blame here, just not following current issues closely enough. You're saying this happened about just a few days ago. A number of U.S. troops that came out were killed. Is that
in Niger and Africa?
Gotcha.
And it came out about 10 days ago. So I asked I did a couple of radio shows back there, and one of them was a black reporter, a black journalist, and who'd never heard of it. And these were mostly black young men who were murdered. And I said, so how many other countries are we disrupting? I'm going to say something really rather bizarre to you. The United States does not need an army at all. But as Jim Garrison pointed out, the Depression of the 1930s was ended by the Second World War. Now, when the war is over and you have 1.5 million men coming back to the country, how many toasters can they make? How many TV sets can they make? How many cars can they make? How long will these things last? Maybe a couple of years. So what you're going to have is you're going to have another depression. America could not survive, capitalism could not survive if we had peace. But if you build a bomb, it's over in a minute. It's an $800,000 bomb, and then you build 100 more that can explode that day. And we became a warfare state, which we are now. We are spending 5 times more money now on the military than we did during the Second World War. But these people are brilliant. The Boeing airplane has parts made by 50 different states. So they're not going to vote to, hey, we don't need all these Boeing airplanes. We don't need all these bombers, because a lot of their constituents in their 50 states would be out of work. The other thing that bothers me also, and you've seen it, it looks like Nuremberg in the 30s. As a matter of fact, Jim Garrison said that the conclusions of the House Select Committee about the fact that there was a conspiracy and it overturned the Warren Report, he said it was never reported in the news. He said it's like Germany in the 30s. And that's exactly not for example, the NFL, which is a nonprofit organization, if you would believe it, is given millions of dollars a year, as is every sporting enterprise, to march soldiers out on the field before the game starts. What is that all about? It is absolutely and totally unnecessary. And I'll tell you why we do not need an army. The United States has about 40,000 nukes of all sizes, and they have mini nukes, Jaffe, that they could put on a drone, as they have done, and they could target anyone around the world and evaporate them in an instant. So nobody is a threat to the United States. So why do they need an army? They need an army to take over the natural resources of the countries that they conquer. And that is what it is we were doing. And it's all documented in the film. Now, people are running around now looking through these documents so that they can see if they can find a smoking gun. The two most important documents are already in this film. The most important is dated 1967, when Garrison arrests Clay Shaw. There's a document directing the legal arm of the Central Intelligence Agency to get aid to Clay Shaw. Otherwise, Jim Garrison would get a conviction. The other document is, of course, we have these wonderful people like Mark Lane, who after reading the Warren Report says this should be in the fiction section of the library. The only way to believe the Warren Report is not to read it. And he did a brilliant book tearing it apart legally that would have held up in every courtroom in America and could not get the book published in the United States. He had to go to England with the help of Bertrand Russell and get it published. He was paid $1,500, and because it was such a runaway hit, because we have capitalists in this country who like to make an easy buck, they said, well, let's bring it over here, where it became, for the New York Times for 3 years, a national bestseller. So, you know, it is the last hurrah. And the other document that's in there shows how the Central Intelligence Agency created the word conspiracy theorist and how they should be able to belittle these people and charge them with being communists or communist dupes or guys who were and women who were just trying to make money. It's all out there for everybody to see. And of course, none of the Congress people showed up to see this film. And if I were a reporter in New York, I would have rushed to interview John Barbour and take a look at his film and try to tear it apart. And you can't. There's no way you can rebut all of these facts. So nobody in the mainstream media is paying attention to it. And worse is most of the leaders in the so-called assassination community are so involved with their own videos and their own books that they too are ignoring it. And yet it's a runaway hit on Amazon and Vimeo. The reason I put it on Vimeo because Amazon doesn't reach Australia or most of Europe, but Vimeo does. And it's doing fantastic. And as I said, in just a couple of days, viewing on Amazon has doubled.
And it's available for around $2 a pop, I guess, from the sounds of things. As you said, via Amazon and Vimeo. Are there any other outlets or platforms where you are allowing the public to be able to get their hands on it?
Well, what I'm doing right now is I'm preparing it technically to probably go up on iTunes. Now, get a load of this. I edited it in 20 of the leading film festivals in the world, including San Sebastian, where part 1 in 93, the Garrison tapes, won. And I sent it to the Moscow Film Festival because I was hoping that Putin would do for me what he did for Trump. You know, make him famous.
Sure, yeah.
And everyone turned it down, but the most insulting one for me is I live in Las Vegas, and they claim to have an independent film festival here, and I entered it here. And, of course, they turned it down. And only 2 of the 20 organizations that turned it down had the courtesy to say, no, we had 1,000 submitted and there were just too many. There was no room for it. I didn't even get that courtesy from Las Vegas. And guess what they picked over my film? They picked a documentary about a young, lonely girl in Vegas called Pussy.
Oh, jeez. Well, I'm not sure what to say about the whole Vegas thing, but as far as the Toronto Film Festival goes, because from the lead up to today's conversation, we like to do our research on each of our guests, of course. You're no different than the rest as far as that goes. So, but they turned you down as well up in Toronto. And I tell you, my only retort to that is 2 words straight out of the mouth of George Carlin: yuppie cocksuckers.
How dare you say the word yuppie on radio?
or nigger. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So I tell you, that broke my heart because I was looking forward to go back. I was a dropout at 15 and hopping a freight train to get out of Canada when I was 15 years of age. So the only time I went back there was when I was a stand-up comic. The most famous is the Royal York Hotel, the most famous hotel. I ended up going back as Marilyn May, great girl singer, as her opening act, but I never had a chance because I was so busy to go back to where I went to school or where I used to live. So I thought it would be a slam dunk that they would, because I was deported from the United States when I was 17 in chains, and then I was kicked out 10 years later after I snuck back in again. So I told them these people back there when they considering it, I said, I don't care if you don't even like the film, but the story of my adventure is worth my being there, for crying out loud. And they turned it down, and so that really broke my heart. That one did. I was hoping for better. But there is a company called Juice in Toronto, which is submitting it to Netflix, and Netflix is considering it as we speak. But the upshot is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has accepted it for Oscar consideration. Now, how is that?
Holy wow, jeez, wouldn't that be something? So that
I wouldn't know what to say. Do I get up there and thank the CIA for this Academy Award? I mean, Bill Hicks would say it, but I wouldn't have the courage to.
It's quite a bit of a feather in your cap there for sure if that was to come about. So, hey, we've got a lot of ground to cover here, and you've really kind of set the tone for things here. Come out of the gates flying hot as a pistol, I guess as the expression goes, for the past 15, 20 minutes or so, doing a great job just kind of breaking things down to the listening audience. We've got about half a dozen folks there in YouTube at the moment as we stream things out live here, along with the slideshow that we put together, of course, on a week-to-week basis. It is episode 85, the JFK Files, with our special guest, John Barbour, documentary filmmaker, of course, actor, comedian, and television host, former, actually, co-producer, I guess, and creator of the hit TV series Real People. That was a big deal for a couple of years there back in the early 80s, late 70s, as things...
When we were on the air, when I was writing and producing that show, we had a 50 share. That meant that half of all television sets in America, half of them were tuned to our show. And you see in the documentary, The American Media and the Second Assassination of John F. Kennedy, how sadly that show was ended because my executive producer, George Slaughter, illegally slandered and sabotaged a story about Jim Garrison, and we had a parting of the ways. But that show was one of the major reasons you have that wall in Washington, D.C., the memorial to those soldiers who were killed in Vietnam. We were responsible for helping John Walsh get the Missing Children's Act passed after his son was beheaded and kidnapped. We were responsible for getting the only celebrity we ever had on the show was Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, and that's because I did the story of the Navajo Code Talkers who had helped the Allies beat the Japanese in the Pacific, and they were never recognized because Navajo is an unwritten language. That's how the Japanese broke every code, but they couldn't break that. But when the war was over, the U.S. government and the military didn't want them recognized because we may be going to war with Russia and China. But when their sons and nephews graduated from Marine School in San Diego, I did the story, and we got a call from the White House saying they had to install extra banks of phones. And the next day, Ronald Reagan came on to give them a presidential citation. 60 Minutes couldn't do that in the 30 years that they were on the air that we managed to do in 3 years when I ran the show.
It's clearly the lack of political will is what we're seeing here from our end. People throughout the alternative media, what I like to refer to as the fifth estate. Isn't it interesting, too, that within the establishment, big corporate media, you never hear a single thing about Operation Mockingbird? Not a single thing. They never mention, nothing, just like you say, you know. So out of sight, out of mind, they set the agenda, of course, as you're well aware, and the parameters to which we're expected to carry on our discourse. A lot of editing going on in the post-production rooms around, the world.
I'll tell you a little sidebar. John J. McCloy, first of all, you might remember after 9/11, of course, George Bush did not want to testify, and people were really upset. They wanted a commission, and guess George Bush, he selected Henry Kissinger, a wanted war criminal in France for the murder of Salvador Allende in Chile. Him and Richard Nixon. He can't go to France, otherwise he'll be arrested. And there was such an outcry, not from the press, but the families of those 3,000 people who lost someone. You cannot have Henry Kissinger. So they got rid of Henry Kissinger. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked into the business of 911. And when I got to Washington D.C. and everybody found out I was from Las Vegas, the first thing they wanted to know about was a shooting in Las Vegas, and I would tell them, I am only interested in one shooting, and that's the shooting on November 22nd in Dealey Plaza, which destroyed America and changed the world for the worst forever. And every evil thing that let me put the word evil in parentheses, but every evil thing that I think America's done since then could be laid at the feet of the planners of the coup that took over this country in 1963. You solve that case, which is already solved, but you get them to open it in a courtroom. There will be people today who will be arrested. Now, no one will be executed. Obviously, they don't do that anymore. But the public will know that this government is a fake government and has been since November 22nd, 1963. So anyway, any questions? The folks that watch you on YouTube, do they have questions?
They often do. We've also, interestingly enough, managed to bring on board our first troll. So let me lay this on you here. Shell Suit, who claims that Joe Kennedy owned RKO and had two sons die on TV. LMAO, fake as fuck. So who RKO? What does that stand for exactly, John?
Well, RKO was one of the minor movie theaters. As a matter of fact, that's where Fred Astaire got a lot of his start, Katharine Hepburn, and it was owned at one time by Howard Hughes, who did Wings there. But Joe Kennedy actually was the owner of Paramount Studios, and his mistress was Gloria Swanson for a number of years. Now, you take a look at his elder son, Joe, died in the Second World War. I mean, there was a time, if you go back 300 or 400 years, you will find there was a time when the leading kings and princes used to lead their armies into battle.
That's right. Yeah. Now
they stay behind and they send somebody else's cannon fodder. But in the Second World War, John Kennedy almost died. PT-109 was the boat that he was on. And although George Bush Sr. was a pilot, I think that George Bush Sr. played an important part in the assassination of John Kennedy. And he is one of the people that's on the wanted poster. And the reason I say this is that the Bay of Pigs operation for the CIA was called codename Zapata. Zapata is the name of Bush's oil company. The two boats that carried the troops were called the Barbour, his wife, and the Houston, where his office is. So this proves that he was a major force at the Central Intelligence Agency. He's the only man his age in America who does not remember where he was on November 22nd, 1963, and we have proof that he was in Dallas, Texas.
There's one more person, though. Let's not forget, John. There's Richard Nixon. You forgot to mention Richard Nixon. He didn't remember either for some strange reason. So, yeah exactly.
Yes, it's reported that Richard Nixon was there. It's reported that a number of people were there, but that is incidental. Speaking of people who were there, I got to tell you an interesting sidebar story to the Garrison tapes that I did. I had a cameraman by the name of George Elkins, and like me, he came from a very dysfunctional home long before it was popular. And his father was in the military, and he almost never saw his father. So he was an absentee father, but the father never divorced the mother. Anyway, the movie comes out, and of course, George is the leading cinematographer. He's got a credit. And he got a call from his father. And his father said he was proud of what he saw his son has been working on and wanted to know if John Barbour would meet him at Patty's coffee shop in Toluca Lake for a cup of coffee. He had a lot of things that he wanted to tell him. And then George told me that his father admitted that he was second in charge of intelligence in Vietnam during the Vietnamese War, and he just retired. And he has some information he wanted to impart to me. So I said I'd be happy to meet him, and I went to meet him. And there was no question he was military. I mean, the guy was about 6'2" and crew-cut, really nice-looking guy, and sat down. We just had a cup of coffee. He said, John, I have to apologize because I told George that I wanted to talk to you and tell you stuff. He said, but I just retired and I need a paycheck. But you did a monumentally interesting film on Jim Garrison. I will tell you just two things. He said, just before the Bay of Pigs, every intelligence agency in America, and he says there are about 17 of them, naval intelligence, military intelligence, we were all in Miami. We had the largest map of Havana, Cuba that you have ever seen, with every address and every cubicle and every square inch of that city. We were assigning ourselves the offices we would occupy after we had defeated Castro at the Bay of Pigs with air support. But when John Kennedy denied the air support, and you see him on camera in our film saying there will be no military intervention by U.S. forces, and he repeats it twice. So he said no. And George's father said to me there wasn't one guy in that room who didn't holler at that motherfucker. Okay? That's what they said about the President of the United States. And he said that's where it began. And that's exactly what Jim Garrison said when I asked him, when did this start? He said, the Bay of Pigs. And the other thing he said, have you ever heard of Soldiers Field in Chicago? And I said, yes, absolutely. He said, well, you know, it's a relic built to war, and they have an officer's quarters in there. You can go in there any day of the week, and you won't see 3 or 4 old fuddy-duddies playing poker or drinking beer or just shooting the breeze. He says November 22nd, the place was half full. So evidently there were a lot of people who knew what was going to happen. Now the additional sidebar to this is that George did not have a job coming up. He was going to be out of work. He was an independent. It's very tough. And there are a lot of talented cinematographers out of work in Los Angeles, a lot of outstanding, all kinds of talents out of work because most of what they make is mediocre. So it's tough to be good at something mediocre. But anyway, he got a phone call one day from a voice he didn't recognize. Said, is this George Elkins? Yes. Mr. Elkins, how soon could you get a crew together to come back to Virginia? Well, George thought it was some kind of joke, and he said, to Virginia, to do what? And the guy identified himself as a publicist or part of the publicity department for the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley. And he said, we have an awards ceremony, and like you folks out there have your Oscars and your Emmys, we have an awards ceremony, and we would like to have you videotape it. Could you come out? How much would it cost? Well, of course, George thought it was a sham. And so he just threw out, he said $50,000. And the guy said, thank you very much, and then hung up. So then it was over with. And George said, John, I didn't mention my bank. I didn't mention anything. The next morning I went to the bank. There was $50,000 in my bank. All the information came to me about where I had to go. For 2 years, he was a videographer of the award ceremonies in Langley, Virginia. And he says what they do is they line all these people up. They put these honors, they pin them to their lapel or their breast or whatever. They have these glowing words for them. And these people get to speak. When it's over, they walk down the line and take them off of their shirts and put them away because they don't want these things hanging around his or her house. And he did that for 2 years. How's that for a sidebar story?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Chicago because I'm not sure if there's a tie-in, a direct tie-in or not, but there was another plot that is said to have been in place via Chicago, which ultimately ended up being, I guess, they kind of pulled the plug on that one and decided to go with Dallas instead. But let me just say...
They didn't pull the plug on that one. The Secret Service agent involved was a fellow named Abraham Bolden.
Gotcha. They blew the whistle. It was, you betcha.
No, it was an accident because the manager of the motel had walked by a room where the door was open, and there were a couple of Latin-looking guys in there with rifles and guns and stuff like that, and they were going over a map of the parade route. Evidently, a phone call had come in. Abraham Bolden tells the story. A phone call, and Abraham Bolden was the first black to serve in the Secret Service, hired by John Kennedy, and he was loathed by every member of the Secret Service because at that time they didn't want any blacks anywhere. So anyway, Abraham tells this story. Now, John Kennedy is killed. Abraham Bolden wants to tell his story to the Warren Report, and they don't want to hear his story, and they sentence him to 5 years in prison.
What the hell for?
Who knows what for?
Holy
and it took the work of thousands of Americans to get the man released. Now he's about 75 or 76. 2 years ago, he spoke at one of the conferences in Dallas. But he's home now. I don't know how long he's going to last, but we put his clip in our film. There was also another attempt in Miami that was intercepted by good Secret Service agency. They stopped the motorcade and they put John Kennedy on a helicopter and flew him out. Then when we get to Dallas, you will see Emory Roberts, the head of the Secret Service in Dallas, pulling his agents off of the car as it turns to go down toward Elm Street. And you see a couple of the agents shrugging and saying, what are you doing? They were yanked off of the car. Yanked off of the car. I mean, the murder of John Kennedy was one of the sloppiest operations in the history of militarism in this country. I mean, it's so shabby, looks like it's performed by Monty Python. However, the suppression by the media has been absolutely brilliant and airtight and secure. And we have a whole chapter in the book called, there were 78 people who disappeared or were murdered that the House Select Committee names. And we show you, it's a chapter called The Carrot and the Stick. And the stick, of course, is being killed. We show you a half a dozen who were killed, and then we showed you a half a dozen who are rewarded by thwarting any investigation, beginning with Dan Rather.
Well, yeah, it's his description of what he saw on the Zapruder film is quite... it's mind-boggling. So I'm just going to kind of put the brakes on things right there because you've got to actually head off to the Jeff Wren show in just 10 or 15 minutes at the most is what it looks like here. So with your, I guess, what is a monthly appearance that you make. So we want to just kind of maybe a little kind of just wrap or rattle things off here. one by one, because there's so many different talking points here, I tell you. But let's just give a quick shout out and word of thanks to Carol Sloan and Carolyn Rose Goida. I'm not sure who exactly, but one of the two, or maybe both of them, they kind of helped to set up today's conversation, show, interview, what have you. So a big shout out and word of thanks to them. How long have you known the two the two Carols?
I've known them for about 10 years, ever since I got a computer. And so I not only want to thank them, I want to thank, there's so many people I don't know. And many of the contributions that came to the film, Jaffe, came from people that I had never, ever met. Because when they heard that I was starting to do this, they just contacted me about material that they had. A lawyer in Washington, D.C. by the name of Brian Lloyd. He's 51 now. He's had 3 heart attacks. But when he was a kid, around 14 or 15, he started collecting everything he could from the media about John Kennedy's death. And one of the things that he found was a free press, a couple of copies of the free press in Los Angeles. And now you all know who Larry Flint is. He is the owner of Hustler magazine. Back in the 1970s, he bought the most popular underground paper in America called the Los Angeles Free Press. And in it, he took on the national media for not being a free press and offered a $1 million reward for anybody offering substantial information about the murder of John Kennedy that would lead to an arrest. And a couple of weeks later, he's shot in the back and crippled for life. That material is in the film. And as much as you think you know about America, and as much as you think you know about the assassination, I don't care who you are. You're going to be staggered by what you learn in this film. It's 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it's broken into 10 chapters, so you can take a breather. And so they're only about 8 or 9 minutes long, 12 minutes long. It is the fastest 2 hours and 10 minutes that you will ever see. Now, I hate to say this, Jaffe, because it's my film. The most important film ever made in America was not Citizen Kane or Gone with the Wind or The Godfather, although they're artistic masterpieces. Something that is important is something that changes or improves our culture and our society. The only thing that has done that, maybe Grapes of Wrath a little bit, but mostly with JFK. It led to the passing of the JFK Assassinations Records Act. And without that film, I couldn't have made my 2 documentaries about Jim Garrison. Without that film, I wouldn't have some of the amazing documents that I have in my film. But that film is a recreation of true events. And some of them are exaggerated a little because Fletcher Prouty never did meet Jim Garrison, even though it's implied in the film. So I have to say, and I say this immodestly, this movie is probably the most important movie ever made in America because it so tells how we became what we are. And it's sort of my hallmark gift to this country because it took me years and years to get here. And so I have thanks for the great career I have. I have thanks for the great family that I had. I could not have done this film in any other country. But at one point I asked Jim Garrison, Jaffe, I said, what made you think you could ever take on the federal government? They're hammering you illegally. The media is hammering you illegally. What made you think, even though you'd solved the case, what made you think you'd come out in the end victorious? And he said, John, I guess I thought I was living in the country I was born in. But he wasn't. And Jaffe, neither are you and I. This, though, is my hallmark card, thank you card, to a country that used to be, but no longer is.
There's no doubt about it that what did occur on November 22nd, 1963 was highly traumatic, of course, and monumental. That saw a major shift in the nation's trajectory. A lot of people have speculated what could have been had Kennedy not been murdered, and it's, of course, we're only left to wonder what may have been the case. But
well, I'll tell you one of the things. John J. When Allen Dulles was appointed head of the Warren Commission, there was no uproar over the obvious fraud that this was. If you're pointing the guy that's fired, but another guy who was on the Warren Commission was a guy named John J. McCloy, head of the World Bank. What's a banker doing investigating a crime?
Well, he's Skull and Bones too, wasn't he? Pretty sure.
Yeah, that's not the point. Kennedy hated him. They were always at odds. Sure. Now, John Kennedy, 6 months before he died, he signed Executive Order 11110, which called for the U.S. Treasury to print silver notes, of which I have. Now, at the time, the Federal Reserve interest was like 23.5%. And Kennedy said that the Constitution calls for the Treasury to print money. So he printed money redeemable in silver. So if you lost your home and wanted to borrow $40,000, you'd be paying the Federal Reserve 23% interest. If you went to the government, they would lend it to you and you'd pay it back at 0.5% interest. That would have put the Federal Reserve out of business. The Federal Reserve is a consortium of 6 families, 6 private people who own our country. The minute John Kennedy was shot, the presses were stopped. Now, nobody has repealed that executive order 11110, but nobody has the courage to re-implement it.
That's quite something. Ron Paul, of course, was, even though some would say they're different sides of the political spectrum, Kennedy and Ron Paul, I think they would perhaps see eye to eye on that one particular issue with ending the Fed. And this compound interest. The compound interest is just killing America, obviously.
Why did Ron Paul run as an independent? He just turned tail. And when Bernie Sanders came along, and I was supporting Bernie Sanders, I kept saying publicly, this guy's going to turn into the Democrats' Ron Paul. And he did. These are the most despicable politicians in America because they give you hope and then they stab you in the back. I have absolutely no respect for Bernie Sanders or Ron Paul. I have more respect for those idiots who are born-again Christians and sprouting all kinds of metaphysical nonsense, because at least they're out in the open. They don't raise your hope. You listen to them and think, oh, my God, they're idiots. But you listen to Ron Paul, who's very bright, and you listen to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was so stunned that he could get 12 million people behind him, and most of them were just millennials. They were young kids. Donald Trump never got that. Hillary Clinton could not get 32 people to attend some of her speeches. Couldn't get it. So, and now they're giving Bernie Sanders all this airtime for what? He's already proven he's a coward. What the hell is he talking to us now for?
Isn't it something the way as well, too, with the establishment media, with the lead up to the election? We've only got a few minutes left here, too, and you've got to head off to the Jeff Rense show. So, but on the eve of the election, establishment media was reporting how Clinton was ahead by 50 points, 60. It was a 95% chance she was going to win, and then suddenly the morning after votes have been tallied and counted, just miraculously Donald Trump wins for some reason. That doesn't. What's wrong with this picture? So well,
it's like when Thomas Dewey defeated Harry Truman.
Right.
Okay. But now everybody's going around saying it's the alternative media that got Trump in. No, it was not. The mainstream media got him in, and I'll tell you how they did it. They got huge ratings whenever they had the Donald on the show, and they're in the business of ratings and selling advertising. So they have this Looney Tune on the show who brags about never reading a book, okay? And they think the public are going to find out. A friend of mine calls him Agent Orange. They're going to find out that Agent Orange is not a politician. He's never read a book. I mean, you know what? This is a slam dunk for Hillary because this guy's going to look like an idiot. The biggest thing he had going for him was that he was not Hillary Clinton. That's what got him elected. Mainstream media trying to belittle him, and he outwitted them all. And now he's probably having a great deal. He hasn't released all the CIA files. And I'm sure, and this business of Russian interference in American election is nonsense. These are Bernie files from the Democratic Party who were so outraged by what Hillary did, they were the one that leaked the files. The Russians have nothing to do with this. Nothing at all, but they need to have an enemy in order to keep manufacturing their weapons.
And then suddenly Seth, I've got to confess, I have not followed things as closely as I probably should have, but Seth Rich is a name that does jump out as far as being a player and someone that was a part of the recent election. And then, of course, he's now dead under very mysterious circumstances. Is there not perhaps some sort of angle or connection there as far as what you're kind of going on about here with Bernie and the leaks with respect to Russia and so forth?
Jaffe, I can't speculate on anything like that, but all I know is probably the most honest thing any anchorman ever said in this country was said about 7 weeks ago when an anchorman on CBS said that Julian Assange has never released anything that didn't turn out to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So he said that, it wasn't Russians. He wouldn't say who it was, but a lot of people thought that maybe it was somebody like a Seth Rich, and that's what happened to him.
Hashtag fact check. All journalists, of course, know that they better be, checking their facts before they publish anything or present it to the public as if it were holy writ. So that's really important stuff. Now, you've only got a couple minutes here, John. You've got to, once again, head off to the Wren show. I guess top of the hour is when he's having you. But we've had, once again, around about half a dozen people actually following us live here via the live streaming show. We get typically a lot of downloads, of course, via Podomatic. That's where we host our podcast. So if a show does quite well, in fact, there's been sometimes 1,000 or a couple thousand views or hits or what have you. But let's just once more, before you take off, hear where it is. I think it's through Amazon and Vimeo. People can find your video. And in fact, you even mentioned there was a book version of what you've put together recently as well. Is that not the case?
No. I have written my autobiography, but it's not yet out yet. But all you have to do is go to Amazon, Google the title, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's only $1.99, and what you can do before you buy it, all you have to do is read those 70 or more 5-star ratings, and some, of course, didn't like me. So, and then also go to Vimeo and do the same thing. And thank you very much, Jaffe. I really appreciate being here, and the best of luck to you. And thank you, Carol.
All right, then, John. Happy sailing and good luck with tonight's show over with the Jeff Renz Network. It's been great having you, and we're going to continue here over the next half hour or so and see where we can steer today's conversation. So, wow. I mean, there's so much that we didn't cover there, of course, too. The Kennedy case is such a major historic event, and there's a lot of questions that we're hoping to basically present and have Mr. Barbour field. But as things turned out, he was only available for the first hour of today's, basically the episode 85 Pirate Radio podcast, the JFK Files. So what do you folks think? Did Trump do a good job by making the decision that he did? Was it inevitable that basically that these revelations come to light? What's your take? There's a lot of people combing through things right now at the moment. I guess there's only been about 2% of what was formerly held sealed that's been released to the public. Interestingly enough, and I didn't get a chance to ask him about this, it's unfortunate, but there's a bit of a Hillary Clinton tie-in too, from what I understand. people have talked about, researchers that have looked into things closely, that when she was working for George H.W. Bush back, I guess, during the early 70s as part of the Watergate, I guess it was the Watergate hearings or part of the Watergate committee or what have you, from which, as I recall, she was basically debarred or asked to depart and leave. She was I'm not sure why she didn't end up facing legal charges at that time. Maybe she was, but she had a hand actually in whitewashing the Kennedy files when she was granted access to this classified information. It's also said to be one of the reasons why she, that's kind of basically, you managed to make her way up through the ranks of the political machine and the Democratic end of things by, committing such underhanded acts, basically, of pretty illegal and underhanded, of course, too. So, like I said, we're going to carry things along here, hopefully, for the next 30, maybe 35 minutes or so. Mr. Barbour's made his way over to the Jeff Renz show over on the Renz Network. We, of course, are here broadcasting to you today out of South Korea, just not quite Seoul exactly, but a little south of the Seoul region, as we typically do, and try to basically make magically come together and happen, produce on a week-to-week basis. So, check the streaming YouTube area, see what we got in the chat box. We got a lot of people that are kind of heating things up here in the conversation area. Carol Sloan talking about how Seth Rich is being connected to pedophilia. That would not be a surprise in any way, would it at all? So, it thankfully looks like our shell suit troll has now left the arena. So, just happened to chime in with, once again, for people who missed it, a comment that Joe Kennedy owned RKO and had two sons die on TV, laughing my ass off, fake as fuck. I guess what he's maybe trying to say there is that the Kennedy assassination, in his mind, or his or her mind, was a total fabrication. It didn't happen. Kennedy didn't really die. He's off on some tropical island sipping, pina coladas with Fidel Castro and Elvis or what have you. So, let's see. Thanks for Delqua for popping by, of course, dropping in. We do see him from time to time. Interesting personality that seems to find something of value and interest as far as what we do present here a few times every month. Kat Goya, of course, who has dropped in as well. So it's great that you made your presence known in the house today here. Kat, we did not, of course, bother to... We had thought about going through the formality of asking John for some sort of pirate story or angle or what have you, the way that things typically go here via the Robin Hood. And, of course, Captain Long John Sinclair's, the ship's articles that he's laid out there for the crew here aboard the ship. But we figured because, time was limited that we at best just allow him to take the stage. And, the seasoned performer that he is, he certainly proved it today that he can still let her rip and with all guns and cannons blasting, come on in to the house or aboard, basically take the stage and let people hear it as far as he sees things, his take on any number of issues today, of course, being the JFK Files. But yes, once again, I guess the looming question, one of them, is what do you think? Has the JFK Files and Trump's action regarding them, has it been a positive thing, or is it something that is maybe just further stood to muddy the waters? So my take on it, just the brief kind of lead up to things today, is a couple of the revelations items that I found of interest were the, I guess, confirmation as it is that there was a bullet hole through the windshield that initially whoever was on the scene there, maybe the Secret Service or what have you, presumably at the behest and with LBJ ordering them to take the action, covered up and did away with the evidence. There was a total remake and doing over, remodeling and refitting of the, I guess was it a Cadillac or a limousine? But anyways, that got a total revamping, and the windshield with the bullet hole, that was quickly taken out of sight. So quite telling. A lot of people have said that indeed proves there was at least another shooter who presumably was atop the overpass, within, just on the I guess that would be, not sure what side of Dealey Plaza. Perhaps would that be the west side? So on top of that, though, the J.D. Tippett angle, very, very quite peculiar indeed in the way they tried to set up Oswald, as he claimed, I'm just a patsy. And in fact, that as things turned out, it may indeed have been the case. People the likes of Judith Very Baker, who, I mean, she would be a very interesting person, obviously, to talk to and maybe have on the show at some point, with just her story that she would be able to present to us. She's written, of course, a couple of books on what she claims to be her personal relationship with Oswald, who she claims that she knew for a time down in New Orleans, and they worked together on a secret. It was a project of sorts to weaponize cancer, I guess, as an attempt or in an effort to ultimately have Castro done away with. So it was, said to be backed by the CIA, and it was, there's a lot. Judith, I guess, she's got her supporters as well as detractors. I think John, in fact, is one of the people that does back her up and believes her story when she talks about not only working together with Oswald, but actually, being his, would you say consort or lover, girlfriend for a time as well. So a very interesting character, of course. But question here from Emily: how did Castro come into power? That is a good question. I believe, Emily, it was as a result of a not exactly a military coup, but more of a revolutionary sort of grassroots uprising, if I have got my history straight, just more or less, of course, not being an expert on the matter, this or any others particularly. John is brilliant in his older age, is what Carol Sloan has to share with us there in the YouTube chat area. So hopefully people as well are enjoying the streaming slideshow that we've got going via YouTube as well. A nation reveals itself not only by the men it produces, but also by the men it honors, the men it remembers. John Kennedy, 1963. We've got something actually queued up here we're going to save for the ending of today's presentation. Another half hour or so, I guess, is probably the way that we're going to try to have things run this week. But it's actually the speech that he presented to it was a public speech of sorts, I suppose, but it was at the Waldorf Astoria in 1961, and dealing with secrecy and secret societies and so forth. So April 27th, 1961, President and the Press was the title of the speech, given before the American Newspaper Publishers Association. So yeah, we've got that queued up for the end of today's presentation, basically. Big thanks, of course, to our latest Patreon supporter, Coco Park, who has chipped in $3 per item of premium Patreon content into the tip jar, the pirate tip jar there. So that's great. Brings the total that we have now out there, basically, $10 a show per premium content, of course. Per item of premium content is what we're going to be managing. We're looking at there. So half of that, of course, will be going directly to charity, Pick your charitable or worthy cause, whichever one you can name. We, of course, have got a few that we have here and are going to be promoting more starting December 15th with the launch of this year's Operation Secret Santa. It's the third year, folks. Can you believe it? The first year, of course, things kicked off. It was just a kernel of an idea, really. And it came, I guess, in a flash of insight, I suppose, and a belief that something could be done, something more could be done, and that there was a way of basically making some good things happen. So people have been pretty responsive to it, I would say. Not in a huge sweeping the world exactly, kind of a global sense, not yet at least, but in from the standpoint of people at the grassroots level, throwing their weight and support behind things, either on a verbal or even monetary basis, or just from the standpoint of moral support. So our five now Patreon supporters: Coco Park, hopefully don't forget anyone here, Carol Sloan, of course. Kelly Freeman got the ball rolling there. So, I mean, what a historic and monumental decision that was, Mr. Freeman. Good on you, matey. So, speaking of mateys and the pirate ship here, the Robin Hood, no Captain Sinclair today. Isn't that something? So, I guess there really wasn't time to bring him into the picture with John just kind of... as once again, as listeners clearly heard, coming in and onto the ship and onto the deck there with all guns blazing, and that's great. I personally love his energy and the way that you have characters like this, and he's of course just someone who's, he's a pretty well known person as far as the entertainment world is concerned, and as far as the world of parapolitics is concerned, and conspiracy and so forth. So we don't typically, as listeners to the show, we don't typically go out looking for these more established personalities, but we are more than happy if that's just the way that with the stars being configured in the way that they are, and things seem to line up in that manner, then we're more than happy to bring them on board. So other than that, though, of course, as you well know, we typically go for the more up and coming, less established voices, people who's have yet to really kind of had a chance to get their story out there. So speaking of which, we've got, looks like Bathtub Jen is back for at least a brief visit here, or a brief time, a spell, if you will. And what she's asking about here in the streaming YouTube chat area is talking about how she just received a book called Idle Warriors about Carrie Thornley, wondering if I've yet to receive it. I haven't read it, is actually her question, but no, I have not read it. I've heard about it, and I do believe, it's out there and part of kind of the alternative sort of underground subculture, if you will. People that basically look into these things, and as far as I can recall, Carrie Thornley, who Adam Gorightly, the Prince of Discordia, has basically, he's talked about and written about in a number of his books. Carrie Thornley served with Oswald in the Marines and was stationed with him over in Japan, as well as I believe may have even come across him in New Orleans on at least one occasion, although that was something which it's kind of... Thornley might have been hallucinating as well, or not have recalled things as clearly as perhaps, as the way that they actually occurred. So, but just going back to the conversation here today, Operation Mockingbird, isn't that something? Once again, we will talk about it freely and openly. Hell yeah, we can have a conversation about how the CIA has infiltrated and been actually strategically placed and deployed throughout establishment media. But they refuse to talk about this very thing, which, I mean, in order to bring things about as some manner of reform and change, you've got to talk about it, folks, and you've got to have it known that like it's just not right. Of course, it's a total conflict of interest. So, among other things, we've got Carol Sloan here, who I'm not sure if she wants to join us in the chat room. Just myself here, of course, helping to carry the conversation along here from the broadcast room upon the Robin Hood. But if you're interested, Carol, we could maybe try to bring you aboard and have you share some of your thoughts as far as how you feel today's interview went with John. We had just once again, not quite as many questions presented to him as we had hoped, as far as him being able to field. But who knows? Maybe we can have him back at some point in the future if he feels things went well enough this time around. He is quite a knowledgeable man, obviously, and there's a lot of places people can go and check out his other work and interviews that he's done, presentations throughout the years that have been archived on YouTube, as well as just MP3s on the web and so on and so forth. His latest documentary production, of course, once again, the American media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, can be found via Amazon and Vimeo for only, well, it's about $2 really, $1.99. I guess people can download it and have it at their disposal. So we'll see if we can do that, line things up that way here via PayPal or however they've got things in place there, and get ourselves a copy for the Robin Hood's reading and digital library. So let's get others in chat room too, is what Carol is saying. Okay, well, let's see if we can maybe have her join us here in the WPRPN communications headquarters. And okay, we're gonna just 2 seconds, folks. Carol, if you're standing by, what we're gonna do is add you and make sure that Mr. Barbour is removed from the group so that there's no interference there with the Wren's show that he's doing at the moment, and give her a call, see if she's available or not. Of course, she's been on the road as of late, I guess, touring around, from what we understand. All right, you're back from the conference in Dallas, are you, Carol? We got a bit of a delay there. You're going to want to mute yourself.
I muted.
You don't get, and you're going to want to mute YouTube. So how are things going?
Fine. I'm just laying back here, listening to everything. I love John, so it's fun to listen to him. Well, he is a person with a great heart. It
was quite something, I tell you. It was like a virtual autograph. It's kind of what I was kind of thinking. It's like, wow. It's like very cool. Try not to come across as too much of a fanboy, although really I do respect the man greatly. And he's done so much work, of course, over the years that, it's important that we commend these people. Jim Mars, of course, we lost just recently, so
right.
Didn't really, there's so many talking points and different issues that we didn't get into. We really wanted to focus on his documentary mostly, right, and this Operation Mockingbird that has been a part of American societies for so long, really, I think since the 1950s, as the fact of the matter is. If you go to Wikipedia, though, all it says there is it purports to be, more or less, or it was said to have been maybe CIA operation, but no, folks, it's very real. And in fact, most of the people, from what I understand, most of the people that you see when you turn on your television sets, if anyone even does that anymore at 6 o'clock to watch the nightly news, we sure don't, and we have not bothered to really tune into mainstream, the corporate news stream for, gosh, at least half a dozen years here. So, but yeah, they are these talking heads, the Dan Rathers, and all these other folks that are also, polished up and suited up, that, they're really they're just full of it. Really, they're spin doctors and a lot of this deception. They've got their agenda, marching orders, along with the agenda that they're working on promoting and reinforcing. George Orwell talked about repetition equaling truth. So,
Well, even as a teacher, they say to repeat things,
right.
information to children, to say things to them with a certain cadence, a rhythm, and it attracts their attention. They pay attention more.
Oh, sure. And not only that, but look at the way the television, the technology itself operates. I guess there's a certain vibration or frequency, the way that the broadcasting signal goes out, that it's set,
Right.
it's made to kind of hypnotize, put you in a
Right.
hypnotic state.
In Japan, there were some children who had seizures as a result of watching a television show that involved cartooning and the rapid succession of flashing colors and lights. Yeah, did a number on the children.
Yeah, epileptic seizures and thrashing around on the floor.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't think anyone lost their lives or nothing like that, but definitely. So there's certainly a lot more to things than meets the eye. And I think that goes right back to Plato, in fact, and the Republic, and how it's long been understood this business of appearances versus reality. We don't know what the reality is, and only a fool thinks that what they see is the truth or is the real essence of the matter. The fundamental truth of what it is. So
Right. Just because it comes from the source, from the box, from the TV, makes it seem more real. It must have happened. It must be the truth because it came from our media on television. It's
yeah.
whatever.
Well, I read it in a book, or they printed it in the newspaper, so it must be true. It's something that I actually ask a lot of my students here, the adult students, mostly, sometimes the teenagers, just testing them their basic logic. It's like, well, why do you believe that? It's like, well, I read it in the book. Okay, so everything you read is true. It's like, well, yeah, isn't it? I mean, that's why it's there, right? It's like, oh God, where are, oh geez, there's just so much work to be done as far as, I guess, waking people up, right? A little bit. Just think, people. Just ask questions. That's all you have to do. Just ask questions.
And the person who offers such a topic, let's say at the dinner table, like I did yesterday at Thanksgiving, people wanted to ask me some questions about the JFK conference. So I told them it's way too much for them to handle, the average person. That, it's just something that most people don't ponder upon. They don't think about, well, gee, who killed JFK? Who could have done this?
Right.
Not our country, not our government.
Well, it is 54 years now after the fact, so I think John was talking about, though, how on the 50th anniversary, not a single major news source questioned the fact that maybe Oswald didn't do it, or there was, there were other gunmen, or that Oswald was, because it came out, I think, once again via this plot that was exposed in Chicago, and Bolden, I believe, is the name that of the Secret Service agent, as Mr. Barbour stated and laid out there for people, the first ever black or colored person to serve as a Secret Service agent, according to what he said there. Just in addition to that, very much despised by his colleagues within the ranks of that supposedly seemingly esteemed type. It's like a fraternal organization, I suppose, a brotherhood, really. You would I wonder really how many of the Secret Service members would not be Freemasons or part of some other secret society or fraternal organization. That who was it? Of course, J. Edgar Hoover. That in order to get a promotion within the ranks of the FBI during his reign and his time, which spanned what, like half a century, head of the FBI, that you had to be a Freemason. You didn't go anywhere within the ranks if you weren't. Forget it. Not going to happen. Period. So
that's something Jim Mars would know all about.
Well, yeah, and thankfully, he shared a lot of information, did so much work. He was top of the field there during his time on this earth. You never know when people are going to pass away, of course. But once again, ourselves, as much as we love and respect Jim and his work, we felt that because of our show and the platform that we have here, that it's best under our kind of our mandate, essentially, and our vision, that we focus more on promoting the up-and-coming voices and the unknown or unseen or unheard talents that are out there. Really, bring them on board. Let's hear it. What do you got to say?
For the average person, including myself, just a year or two, I did not know anything about Jim Mars or even John Barbour. I had no idea who these people were. I am still in the thick of getting to know the scoop. I've gone to the JFK convention 3 times now. And I get all excited because I am in the room with these people as they are sipping their drinks, just free-flowing their topics of conversation. And you get all kinds of personal opinions. And whatever their knowledge is, that's where they're coming from. Interesting. I met an older man who I think knows John Barbour, and John may know him. He spent $200,000 of his own money to put a big 2-page spread in the New York Times. And he did this in his effort to let it be known that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill Kennedy. LBJ did. The president, LBJ, was behind it. Of course, we know now the CIA, the FBI, everybody that was under the control of LBJ and, the government, the people who headed the government. They were all in it together. Well, and it dawned on me for the first time that Jackie Kennedy left the country to Greece. Probably she may have been frightened.
Oh, I think she was quite concerned and on edge. I mean, she was right there, right beside her husband as he had his brain blown out in broad daylight for the whole, as things would turn out, not just people that had gathered there in Dealey Plaza on that day, but ultimately via the Zapruder film, the entire world to see. So, I mean, just think of the trauma. Absolutely. You'd really have to be a strong person. And I think she was quite a strong person and character, of course. So very much, it seems, of the American kind of noble or elite aristocracy, the blue blood, the East Coast establishment. But heading off to Greece then, of course, yes, to, as a lot have speculated, with the marriage to Aristotle Onassis, seek some sort of, not protection. Basically not, so much, comfort as maybe protection. Not just her, but her and her children too, right?
Yes.
So she was really concerned about John, I guess, is John Kennedy Jr. We never got into that at all today, but it's interesting because, during the time where John Jr. went missing, he actually, he just returned from Toronto, I think, as things were, and had been talking to someone who, as it turns out, was part of this Nazi underground network that was instrumental in kind of laying the foundation and setting up the framework for what ultimately has, grew to become the CIA from out of if you look at the Reinhard Gehlen, going back into the World War II or whatnot. But he was talking to him there in Toronto about, getting to the bottom of his father's assassination, finding out who actually killed his dad. And as it turned out, I guess this guy, I forget his name exactly, would have to track that down, and I can't exactly recall who I heard that from. And
Carolyn knows some story.
Yeah.
Carolyn talked to somebody, I think, was it on a plane? She met a personal family friend of the Kennedys.
Yeah, I'll just finish here though, and basically kind of just explaining things. How he returned then, I guess, to wherever Cape Cod or wherever it was exactly he was based out of, and then flew to join his family that night. And just as all this was taking place, though, what happened was George Bush Jr. disappeared from the campaign trail, supposedly. And I think this is via Jim Mars, actually, and others that have done the research and looked into it. Where was George Bush Jr.? And what happened was he disappeared off the campaign trail because he was running for president, I guess, at that point, or trying to kind of launch and gear up for the presidential campaign. And he only reemerged a couple days after John, his plane went down, and I guess they managed to track down the bodies there via, the Navy got involved in the whole thing, and then you had Ted Kennedy calling up Bill Clinton, who's kind of, screwing the pooch, or what however you put it, just kind of dragging his feet, sort of drawing things out as long as he could to basically, before he took action. I guess Ted Kennedy was not too pleased about the whole thing, why nothing had been done to, work on taking action to, have his nephew basically, found or some sort of help sent out to see what had actually taken place. So, but here's the thing about it too. I guess at the time, who was running for Senate in New York? Hillary Clinton. So,
right,
and John Jr. had talked about how he himself, like that was the word, I guess everyone kind of knew about it, that he was himself looking at securing that seat. So, politics, huh? Rough game. You say pretty rough contact sport.
It is. There's nothing really ethical about politics, it appears.
Let me just following things here in the streaming chat. Of course, we've had once again just a whole handful of people pop in and I guess drop out at various occasions, coming back to kind of check how things are going as far as today's conversation and presentation is concerned. There's a great picture of it looks like the picture of George H.W. Bush speaking at the Kiwanis Club out of Tyler, Texas. That's where he was. And there's a picture right there that we have in the slideshow once again that's making the claim. So let's not forget there's another photo. That one out of Tyler is really clear. It's there's no doubt about it, unless it's been photoshopped, of course. But the one of him standing out in front of the school book depository, which some people say is not George H.W. Bush, but it sure as heck looks a lot like him. And if it's not, well, who is it? So have you seen that picture?
I think so, yes.
I have no doubt, though, like they've got their hands all over the thing as far as, being a part of the execution and the subsequent the cover-up, the planning end of things, too, probably as well. Let's not forget there's the 3 stages: the planning, the act itself, the execution, and then the cover-up. So I think, what was it that Jim Mars talked about? That, oh gosh, just different branches of government, the Secret Service and the FBI were part of, I think the cover-up, and the Secret Service and the stand down that John talked about here, just today, of course. And I think he was a little off, though, as far as the footage goes. It wasn't in Dealey Plaza where these orders were given to stand down. It was in Love, actually right straight from Love Field, where you can see the Secret Service agent kind of throwing his arms up, kind of shoulders and shrugging, like, what's going on here? And then you got spin doctors coming in there and saying, well, no, it's because of this. And you got all these things. It's like, well, no, it's because of that. And, just everything in the Kennedy case, it's like they're just trying to, they're like the apologists, trying to make excuses to better, kind of uphold and make the official narrative seem like believable, basically, which is not, of course. It's a joke. So clearly,
did you hear anything about the actual Kennedy files that were released? That there's information that says there were some bullet casings found on the second floor of the jail, which is, it would have been behind the car. Anyway, there was evidence that there had been a shooter there. There was also bullet holes underneath the Stemmons Freeway, where there's some archways that would make great protection for a shooter. There were some bullet holes there found. Yeah. One of the researchers I met said there were at least 8 shooters. There was one way or the other they were going to kill him. He was not going to get out alive.
It was a turkey shoot at the triangulation.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, he was a sitting duck, definitely. And the Secret Service, the night before, they'd been partying at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club and gone to work really completely, not in good shape at all. Had been entertained till the wee hours by Ruby's women, and supplied with drinks and God only knows what else, what other miscellaneous stimulants or substances. So, but no, the only bullet holes or evidence along those lines that I've heard of to this point, at least, and I've, once again, this is just what's kind of come my way and what's been presented to my attention, is that there was the bullet hole in the windshield. There's no doubt about that. That's part of the case now that's, been brought to light.
They took that whole window and replaced it immediately.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Warren report is it's a total, of course. So what did he say? What is it, like a Monty Python kind of just a gong show? I think was the term
he said
that I
they were
came
so
up.
bad. They were so poor at what they were doing. It might have been Monty Python comedians,
Yeah. So
doing the whole thing.
One of the a character by the name of Joshua Colley with a few messages retracted actually too in the YouTube chat area. But one of the things that they've drawn to our attention here is that a recently released document states that Jack Ruby asked an informant to watch the fireworks in Dealey Plaza on 11/22/63. I think he knew something that was going to happen that day. So have you heard anything about that? That's the first time.
One of the ladies who actually ended up helping Judith this time, she found out last year. She found some pictures. I don't know where. She was clearing out her computer or something, or entering photographs into her computer for storage. And there was a picture of her 2 uncles who were policemen. And they were standing in front of the grassy knoll with a child. I don't know if it was her cousin or somebody in the family. And she got violently sick to her stomach. I met her in the bathroom. She was emotionally coping with the fact that she then found out her uncles, who were police, were part of the scheme to kill Kennedy. They knew, because there they were, propped themselves up, in this pose in front of the area where Kennedy was shot. Kind of like a before picture.
Where can this photo be found? You said it's of the two relatives?
You would have to talk to this lady. I'd have to get her name and everything. She's very sharp. And she has, what I did? I met her in the bathroom. She was very upset. And she needed to talk to someone. So guess who I had her talk to? John.
John Barbour. Yeah.
Yes, because he's a very fatherly, patient, kind person, and that's the only person I could think of.
Now, this is, as you said, you were at the time at the conference in Dallas this past year?
Yes, last year. And there's always people like that. I met a judge's daughter whose father, as a judge, was working for another judge who was part of the scheme to kill Kennedy. He was so worried about his daughter, he sent her to live in Greece. Even though they were Italian and they had a home in Italy, he whisked her away to Greece because things were getting hot. So he was a part on the sideshow of this grand plan. I think a lot of people were involved in the killing of JFK.
Well, sure, but as we see, with Hoover and others, the establishment, and many, of course, that were involved in the planning, the execution, and the cover-up, they did not want the public, and that came out, that was part of the JFK Files, too. That was clearly, been laid out there now for everyone to see that they were really
85%.
They needed to pin it on just the one guy. They needed Oswald to be the fall guy, the patsy, just like you said before.
Yep.
Coincidentally, just kind of, just wow, imagine that Ruby comes out of nowhere with all these, the police station of all places where you think they would have the best security, and shoots the alleged assassin, who is, from there never able to share his story.
Well, and Jack Ruby was personal friends with Judith too, Judith and Lee. And he probably didn't really want to kill Lee, but there's some talk that there's some MK Ultra stuff going on.
Yeah, well, look, J.D. Tippett and Oswald and who shot Tippett? I don't think it was Oswald.
No, it wasn't Oswald.
I think it might have been Ruby, and that's one of the things that's come out in that gosh, what did you pick up on that at all? That in fact, Tippett was one of the shooters. He was they've heard of Badge Man from the Grassy Knoll? That might have been him.
Right. There was a black lady, a witness, who actually witnessed the shooting of Tippett, and she disappeared.
Oh, yeah. She's on YouTube, isn't she? And she's dead
I
now,
don't
either
know.
way. But...
I just know that there was a witness, and then, 175 witnesses have been killed. So...
Well, yeah, it's pretty... The body count is quite astronomical. In fact, there was a statistician... That's a tough word to get out there. Statistician that did just a calculation of the probability of having all these people just kind of, fall by the wayside. And it was ridiculously infinitesimal, just how minute, how just, it's off
right.
scales. Like, it's just,
really
come on, are you kidding me? Go ahead.
Yeah, he was a speaker, the man that came out with that data. He was they did a YouTube video on a big screen for everyone to hear.
With just laying out the probability of what it would take to have all these people die is like, within the bounds and realm of probability, and this being so far out and ridiculously off the scales. Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's like Leonard Cohen sang about, while he was with us with his famous song, Everybody Knows. These are kind of like, in a lot of ways, these are open secrets, really. But people like John, the work that he's done, the kind of laying it out there and really making the case and driving the point home and, letting the people decide ultimately, of course. But there's no doubt that what Garrison did, his work was instrumental, and he became a marked man.
Yep.
Because
there's a rumor that he could have even been conveniently knocked off.
Jim Garrison?
Yes. Not Jim Garrison. Excuse me. I'm thinking of Mars. There's all these rumors. You just don't know.
Oh, well, that's it. The timing of Mr. Mars and his passing is a little peculiar for sure, because you can bet that he would have had a few things to say, and that in connecting the dots,
I think he had 3 books that were supposed to be coming out.
Well, hopefully his wife, whose name just so happens to be Carol as well, too, I believe, she gets, she remains committed to his vision and his work, along with the rest of the family there too, of course, and are able to see to it that these books are in fact published. Do you have any idea what the topics they were dealing with?
I think Carolyn knows.
Okay.
Somebody talked about what's very strange is I thought Jim Mars would have a spot in the menu here, the schedule at the conference, where people would, talk about him and all the amazing things that he is known for. But they didn't really do that until like the last dinner, and only a personal friend who's from Ontario, Canada, a native of the area, came and did some talking and talked about his sense of humor, what a great sense of humor he had.
Okay, let me just stop you there. Are you saying that John did not have a formal place or billing within the context of this most recent conference in Dallas, the so-called, the Lancer Conference, as it's known? Is that right?
No, it's not the Lancer. Lancer's the 2 doors down, I was told. I've not been to that one yet. Now, this is Jim Mars.
Oh, you're saying that he was left off the
Yeah,
he
no
was
one really talked about him. You know, there should have been a slideshow and a
what?
list of his books.
Are you
There should
kidding
have
me?
been. I am not kidding you.
Oh my God! I mean,
So this
that's
was like one of the
jeez.
greatest conspiracy authors we've ever had, and
Well,
that's what happened.
he's an investigative journalist, is what he was first and foremost, I
Right,
guess, and
right.
author. You know, so I don't like to really use the term. See, this whole thing of conspiracy theorist. All we're doing there by using that is kind of we're allowing, where that came from, the origins of that
From the
term, right?
CIA, didn't it?
And the
Didn't
Kennedy
they?
assassination. So by
Uh-huh.
in using that language or any of these terms or slogans or catchphrases, just without really kind of stepping back and thinking about what it is we're saying, that we're kind
Uh-huh.
of falling into their trap and right into their hands. The way I like to look at things, because I've kind of reflected and thought about this a little bit, is that I'm not
Mhm.
so much of a conspiracy theorist as a political scientist.
Ah, I like that.
It's not conspiracy theory, folks. It's political science. All
Uh-huh. I
right.
like that.
Some people call it parapolitics, the deep state
Uh-huh.
and the shadow government, but
Uh-huh.
with myself, it's political science, period.
Well, for me, who I've really been naive about all this up until just a couple years ago, it's been very eye-opening, all this, and I never really ever believed in evil, and how could such horrible things happen to human beings? But guess what? It happens all the time. The politics is thick.
Uh,
And
well,
and it is intriguing. It is intriguing now. Now that I know it's kind of a chess game within the arena of politics. Um, it is very interesting.
money, greed, power, lust.
Right.
There's
Yes, yes,
life is but
yes,
a stage. That's going back to
yes.
Shakespeare. So let me just to revisit kind of the Pirate Radio podcast chat room on Facebook. Let's not forget we get a lot of activity there from time to time, and often during the course of our weekly live streaming broadcasts. And you yourself have been chiming in there. But let me just talk a little bit about, let me just go on here a little bit. It's going to take about a minute or so, and we're going to want to wind things up here right after that, probably just allow you maybe to get in a few closing comments. But talking about Peter Hymans, he's a photographer. We tried to get him to maybe join us for the last half hour here, but I think you've done a great job stepping up to the plate there. Thank you so much, Carol.
Surely.
It's really very much appreciated. You are more than welcome anytime you want to make your presence known and to help pitch in when you feel the interest or need or what have you. So, but Paul Kunstler is
Yeah.
or is that Kunstler, just to kind of make it try to sound not so
Well,
nasty. But let me
this.
just hang on, Carol. Let me just,
Okay.
because the comments are kind of, we got to catch up to speed here. This is going to go on for like the next 10 hours, but yeah, Paul Kunstler is a researcher speaker who may know John. Paul's around as John's age. Paul Kunstler is the guy you're saying here who paid the money to put out the 2-page spread in the New York Times saying LBJ killed JFK. There's no doubt LBJ had a hand in things for sure. So he was going to jail, as a lot of researchers and historians
Right.
really should. They do know, and they should if they don't. So let's just keep on moving down here. 8 shooters. Well, Paul, researcher, knows this. Okie dokie. Heartburn did himself in. I guess he sure did, exposing himself as a fake revolutionary. Kind of the DNC sort of threw him under the bus, though, too. Let's not forget that. That's, I think, what it really came down to with who was it, Donna Brazil coming out recently, and just all these insider kind of revelations. And there's no doubt that they did him in, but had him thrown under the bus. They're kicked to the curb. He'd served his purpose, and it was Hillary or bust. But it's interesting too, just to take note of how, once again, as you might have heard during our conversation there with the talk with John, how what was it? The night before the election, the eve of the election, and all the major media outlets are talking about, oh God, yeah, it's Hillary by a mile, by a long shot. She's it's probably it's going to be a landslide. It's a 90% chance, or whatever they were saying, to some ridiculous figure. And come morning time, and all the votes have been counted and whatnot, and things looked a lot different from the way that they're trying to steer the end result. But let's just leave that aside for now. So, okay, there's so much here that you've actually. Who is this? This is Pablo Novi. All right, Pablo Novi. Thank you for your comments there as well. Just a critique, kind of comments. Yeah, once again talking about Bernie and so forth and fake. Was it libertarians? Okie doke. So let's see who else. Talking about Judith's love for Lee has propelled her through the years to support her man's honor. She, in fact, we did approach her and ask that, if she was interested in maybe joining us today. She's been super busy, of course, got to be quite tired, drained, and exhausted. But
yes.
She also talked about how this is now like it's a time of just annually a reflection, kind of memorial, kind of, for herself. So, which I think most people can probably understand. Just going over.
It's her therapy. This conference is her therapy.
Cancer was used as a weapon, the goal in mind to assassinate Castro. Yeah, we covered that. Sure, we got it. Definitely. Loud and clear. So, yeah, DARPA and all these other kind of black ops sort of, you don't really ever hear about them too much, but I guess they're out there and they exist. And the spooks and, with these programs to, as I think John talked about it as well, like they're very skilled and accomplished, capable of doing away with people by any means whatsoever. So who knows when it comes to people like Jim Mars. Thankfully, I'm myself as the leading sort of, the main conversationalist here and basically the host of the show. I don't think we're really that too important yet to start worrying about those sort of things. Hopefully, maybe Alex Jones or Jim Mars or David Icke, who knows really, but I guess we'll just have to see. That is about it, though. We've pretty much, there's a lot more we could hit on, of course, too, and a lot of things that I wanted to get around to asking John, but because he's such a speaker and raconteur that he did a great job there. I mean, he's got his own show there, I think, over on, I guess it's John Barbour's World too. Let's not forget, and people can find him on Twitter quite easily enough if they type in Barbour's World, and we'll add all this to the show notes, of course, the Facebook link that he's got there, his account, and no minds.com for him yet at this point. He might be interested though, and maybe finding out or having that drawn to his attention and giving some thought to maybe seeing what he can contribute to things over there on minds.com. But, oh gosh, any last closing thoughts or comments there, Miss Sloan?
The truth shall prevail. And if you believe in the 100th monkey concept, it seems to be a spontaneous way of acquiring knowledge. I think John talked about it tonight, how everyone seems to be rolling along, the truth is growing, people are becoming more increasingly curious, and they want justice. So I think more and more people are focusing on the actual truth. They want it to be revealed. No more of this fun and games, weird corruption stuff.
Well, Kennedy said in fact, the famous speech that I believe we're going to present here at the end of today's conversation in just a couple moments, is how the great Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed a crime to, basically, to paraphrase now, that as every citizen, it was your duty to stand up and face controversy head on, not to shy away from anything that was considered to be a hot issue. It was your duty. You had a responsibility, a moral duty and responsibility. The Buddhists might call it dharma. That was your job, though. You were asked and required, and not to cower away or to, spend time just distracted and focused on other things elsewhere. And it seems we do live in a time and age where people really are easily distracted and able to be drawn away from maybe what are a little more kind of important meat and potatoes issues. So,
Jaffe, I love the way you bring in, the Buddhist concept, and it makes it seem more special, it resonates with a truth that I think needs to be talked about.
Yeah, it's our sacred and moral responsibility. That's we have that's part of what it is called for when in the process of waking up, I suppose, is really what it seems. That it's the lion's roar of the lion's roar. If people want to look up that term within the kind of Buddhist context. So, yeah. Hurricane, speaking of lions roaring and so on and so forth, the Hurricane Harvey, I found it very interesting, the timing of the so-called Hurricane Harvey, which hit Texas, I believe. Did it?
Right.
Is it Texas? No, that was quite interesting. And now, what do we have?
Geoengineered.
Right on the heels of things, and I didn't get a chance to ask John about this, but it would be interesting to see I'd like to know what response or remarks he might have to offer in light of this. That I think the timing is quite peculiar, and they say that in politics, timing is everything. So yes, weather wars, geoengineering, but let's not just forget Oswald. Harvey Weinstein, or Weinstein, I guess, is how some people pronounce it. There's another Harvey there that's been making quite a racket there as well, via courtesy Hollywood. So a big ruckus for sure.
A very slimy ruckus.
So which is it, Oswald or Weinstein? Was kind of my question. Which of the Hurricane Harveys are we really looking at here? Who's caused the biggest or most spectacular uproar? And
I look at everything as stepping stones up the ladder that goes towards the truth. Chaos, distraction, that seems to be the way of the news media. Shock. By the way,
shock and awe.
On the Pirates message thing, we have the photographer. He's just joining us.
Well, I tell you what, we're going to kind of now's the time we usually do our after show. So let's we'll think about putting something together here for the premium content end of things. Thanks once again to everyone who's been listening today, as well as our special guest, Mr. John Barbour. We are going to transition on out of here, maybe head on off to the how does the Howling Wolf Inn sound, Carol?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
It's more of a single, lonely howl.
Well, we could do the Scurvy Dog if you prefer that or the Mossy Wench. You take your pick there. So we haven't found too many other watering holes or gathering places, houses of ill repute, as they're sometimes known. Oh wow! Well, we are pirates after all, yar.
Okay.
So.
Oh wow.
Well, we'll definitely talk to you then. Shortly, catch you on the flip side. But in the meantime, we're going to cue up President Kennedy's famous speech regarding secret societies. It was actually out of the Waldorf Astoria is where he gave the speech, April of 1961. The President and the Press, before the American Newspaper Publishers Association. And quite a historic speech it was. I think his words are worth listening to, and that's why we've selected this. We've chosen that for people to listen to today and take note of in case they have not heard it before or reflected on his words. Happy sailing, everyone, and we will see you with episode 86.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.